Good morning, afternoon. We have a great panel for you this morning, including two of the great retailers in the United States and one of our great property owners. My name is Nikki Gelani, and I'm the president of SiteWorks. We have offices in New York and London. We do work for both retailers and owners, and we do everything from rolling out chains across the United States. We've done about 20 of those over the years, including two that I was the head of real estate, to analytics for both owners and retailers. We're very lucky to have this great panel with us today, and I'm going to start out by letting each of them introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their companies. And then we'll go into a PowerPoint discussion that gives you a little bit of background before we start our questions and answers. So Eric?
Eric Holman with Madison Marquette. We're an investor-operator of retail and urban mixed-use projects in the coastal markets of the U.S., New York, Washington, D.C., North Carolina, South Florida, Seattle, San Francisco, and Los Angeles. I'm based in San Francisco. We're kind of co-headquartered between San Francisco and Washington, D.C., and we manage and lease about 15 million square feet in the U.S.
Good afternoon. My name is David Schulman. I'm the Vice President of Real Estate for Staples. We have about 2,000 stores worldwide, most of them in North America, United States, and Canada. And we're the second largest retailer on the internet in terms of sales after Amazon.com, so we're very multi-channel oriented. And although we've been known in the past, up until about 2 or 3 years ago, as an office products company, and we still, of course, have a significant amount of product and percentage of our sales in that core business. At this point, we're going through a rebranding, which basically is that we would sell whatever product and services your company or business will need to succeed, because the core customer of our stores and online are the small businesses of 50 persons, 50 employees or less.
David, quick addition. You have a footprint in Europe and in the United States. Can you just give an idea of how large
Sure.
they might be?
The United States has around 1,500 stores. Canada has around 150 to 200, and the UK has around 100. And then there are other stores interspersed in Argentina, Australia, China, India, Portugal, Italy, and Norway.
Hi, I'm Art Tropp. I do the real estate for Williams-Sonoma. I've been doing that for a little over 25 years now. We've got a chain of just under 600 stores across 5 brands. The Williams-Sonoma namesake brand, focusing on kitchen. You're probably most familiar with that brand. And then we have Pottery Barn and Pottery Barn Kids and Pottery Barn Teen, and we also have that has to do obviously with the home, or maybe not obviously, but then we have another brand that's something we created about 5 years ago called West Elm. Does the same thing that Pottery Barn does, but different fashions, hipper, cooler, and it's doing extremely well wherever we put it around the world. So. That's been great for us. We also have a final brand. It's called Rejuvenation. We bought that recently, a couple of years ago, focusing on lighting and hardware and other gadgets for the home. We're working on that. We've got 5 stores with that one. But again, we're just under 600 stores, not including the franchises that we have. And that would add another 33 stores between the Middle East and the Philippines, and soon to be next year in Mexico.
Thank you all. So we're going to give you a brief, maybe 4 or 5 minute survey of how things work in the United States versus how they work in Europe and why they work differently. And then we're going to have a conversation with these guys about what their experiences are. To the extent that you either operate in the United States or you're thinking about operating in the United States, our aim is to help you understand the differences between operating elsewhere in the world, particularly here in Europe, and what you're going to encounter when you come to the United States. So with that having said, let's start with the basics. U.S. has 46 square feet of retail per capita. Anybody have any idea how much Europe has? Any numbers to throw out? Yes, sir. Nope, go to the next slide. You're wrong. You're way too high. It's way too low. It's 9. We have more than 4 times the amount of retail that Europe has. And over again, we have some of our best and brightest come over to Europe, see something they like, bring it back to the United States, and it fails. And it fails because it's out of context, and the underpinnings of the way markets work in the United States are very different. So let's go on. Where is all that extra retail? That's where it is. We have a massive infrastructure of what I call commodity retail. And in the United States, we have a very massive and a very organized infrastructure of commodity retail, and every one of those boxes you see on the screen is a category that was once sold in a general merchandise department store. So our department store industry is in the final stages of a 30-year collapse. I'm not talking about Nordstrom, by the way. I'm talking about what were general merchandise department stores, mostly now operating under the name of Macy's, Sears, or Penney's, but including Dillard's and some others. And they are in the last stage, the 3rd stage of a 30-year decline. So it's been a consolidating and a shrinking market for 30 years. So today, the way it works in the United States is we have 2 large bodies of retail. They're different. They're completely different. And if you're coming to the United States, you must know the difference between the 2. And you must also know that about 80% of our retail is commodity, meaning that mess of boxes you just saw is about 80% of what we have. So if that's 80%, we only have 20%. That's the other stuff. And here in Europe, it's probably backwards. It's probably about 80% high streets or fully functioning retail streets, some malls, and a very small number of commodity centers. So in the United States today, we have commodity retail, and customers use commodity retail very simply. To get what they need when they need it at the right price, they have no emotional attachment to it. You don't go for a stroll in Walmart or Staples. You go to get what you need and you get out. If you're going to a specialty center in the United States, you go there to feel good. And you feel good by either buying products that are aspirational or you're going to a place that feels good to you. So skip on to the next slide. So this is how commodity retail works in the United States. Believe it or not, it's very scientific. The merchants are very smart. The merchants have divided themselves into 7 different classes of convenience and price. And so in the United States, if you want a diaper, you can get a diaper at a convenience store, a drugstore, a grocery store, a discount store like Walmart. You can get it at a big box store like Buy Buy Baby, and you can even get it at Costco. And from the left side to the right side, you're going to pay more, but you're going to get it quicker from the left side, and you're going to pay less, and you're going to get it less quick from on the right side. And every consumer in America makes subconscious decisions about how they buy their commodities. So if you're coming from another country and you're coming to the United States, you must understand that that kind of retail is not about experience. That kind of retail is about price and convenience, and you have 6 different primary choices, the internet being the 7th choice. We're not going to spend a lot of time on the internet today, but the internet's the only one that can actually change its price and convenience equation. And when I do these things back in the United States and I ask the question, how many of you bought on something on the internet because it was cheaper, hands go up. And then when I ask how many of you bought something on the internet because you couldn't find it locally, always more hands go up. So more than likely, a large percentage of internet sales are actually accretive sales, new sales. And that's why we continue to have bricks and mortar retail sales going up at 3.5% to 4% a year. Let's go on then. So then we're left with the 20%, which is about the 100% of what we talk about in the United States, which confuses everybody because they want to put streets in Walmarts. But that's not how it works. So when it's all said and done, we're going to end up with 3 different ways you can shop for specialty goods in the United States. And it's kind of the way it is now, but it's still shaking out. So one way is you can buy in what's going to be left of the great malls, the fortress malls. And all the great retailers who come over know what those fortress malls are, and then they find their ways in. Second way is on high streets, and we have our share of high streets. We certainly don't have anywhere near the share of high streets that any typical European city does. And lastly is open-air specialty centers. And you may be interested to know that about 75% of the open-air specialty centers that have been built in the United States in the last 15 years have failed. So we have no clue how to build them correctly. Go on to the next slide. Here's our guys. These guys practice in this world every day. Eric, his company buys and owns across the spectrum. David, his company operates in the commodity world and is pretty active in changing its store size. And then Art operates primarily in the upscale world, but also has stores that are in the commodity world and finds himself sometimes dealing with both worlds. So let's start with a question for all of you. On the way here, literally walking down the hill, I got an email from a friend of mine who runs an 800-store chain in the United States. And the email, all it had was the words, "The trend continues," and then it was a forward of an email that said, "Sears is closing more stores, laying off 7,000 more people, blah, 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 blah." So let's start from the beginning. What does it mean that, for all of you, either acquiring or operating, that we are basically seeing the disintegration of a large portion of our department store infrastructure going forward? Let's start with Art.
For what we do and for who our customer is, the loss of Sears is really not going to make a big difference. So it's not one of the metrics we look at. So it's probably not going to affect us.
But you probably don't go into any malls that have a Sears, or that don't have a better department store and rely on a Sears for their traffic.
Exactly. So, it's the better department stores that we like to associate with, that our customer
David?
does well.
I would like to use the Sears example in this way. As is the case with Staples, we have been about 24 to 25,000 square feet in size for the last 10 years or so. And in the last year and a half, we've now reduced our prototype to around 12,500 square feet, approximately half. And we're seeing that as a real trend in the United States, with some retailers more than others. We're affected by our internet business and also the general dynamics of our industry more than others, perhaps. But the Sears demise, as Nick just mentioned, is an example of retailers slowing down, cutting down their sizes. And in fact, one of the reasons why the United States is not seeing a lot of new development now is because of the availability of spaces that already exist. Financing and other considerations, of course, are very important. So I think the downsizing and the slowing down of the expansion of retailers in general in the United States is indicated by the Sears. And I think second, if I was a retailer coming to the United States, one of the major elements of my strategy would be to network with other retailers, either in the United States and or in Europe, to find out what their experiences are. We're seeing now Primark, who I know most of you know, taking over portions of Sears spaces, and instead of finding new locations for themselves or taking over vacant boxes. So once again, the Sears example is, in my view, a good example of how a retailer with creativity and forethought can expand in the United States without having to generate new development.
Well, Nick, I'm one of your disciples on your commodity specialty continuum. And one of the things you talk about is how the efficiency of the market, that the box center is a far more efficient delivery mechanism than the enclosed regional mall. And so taking that thinking in mind, and also another thing you haven't mentioned, but is worth mentioning, is the squeeze of the middle class, the squeeze of the middle in our country. Wages aren't growing for that sector, and so retailers, I think smart retailers, are either moving towards being very cost efficient or moving toward the high end. The department stores, some of which you might want to talk about, because you know this area better than I, that are stuck in the middle are having the problems. And some of those department stores have very little maneuvering room to operate. You got Walmart down here, and you got the specialty high street retailers up here, and there's not a lot of business that's growing. So our response at Madison Marquette to that is we're located in the coastal markets, the higher income, higher education markets, and we're interested in the high street, but what we observe there is very expensive rents, very expensive pricing. So we think the play today, and what we've been doing, is buying in emerging districts in established coastal markets. We've been buying in Williamsburg and Long Island City. We've been buying on Melrose Avenue in Los Angeles, La Brea Avenue in Los Angeles. We've been buying in, we're actually very interested in Pioneer Square in Seattle. These are emerging districts that are benefiting from the growth, which is attracting a lot of attention and a lot of high pricing and high rents, we wonder about the sustainability of that. So we're looking for the spillover effect. So we're going after the specialty customer. And we think these are good entry points as well, which we can get into, for European retailers in these emerging, because we're starved for new concepts in the United States. Right. And we're very interested in finding
Yeah, so let's
new ideas.
let's put that in context. So if 80% of our square footage is in commodity retail, it's also worldwide. We have 7 billion people in the world. The primary function of retail is to actually feed and clothe people worldwide. So we in the profession tend to spend a lot of time talking about the high end. But the fact of the matter is, in the United States, of the nearly $5 trillion of sales that go on every year, about $4 trillion of it are just feeding and clothing people. So we have a huge infrastructure that's just about commodity retail, and it's very mature and it's not growing very rapidly. The other part is actually our infrastructure, as you're hearing, is actually contracting. So there's a huge opportunity on the development side, on that side going forward, and you see a lot of people all over it. Just one little addition. So we did a study for a 900-store chain recently. We looked at 14 different types of real estate venues they're in, including A malls, B malls, and C malls. C malls being under 300 a foot, B malls being 300 to 400, and then, or 300 to 550, and then above A malls. And that particular chain, which is in the middle, and I'm not going to mention who it is, but if they closed every store in their A, B, and C malls, they would be more profitable tomorrow. So if you are a middle-level retailer, and you're thinking of coming to the United States, and you are positioned in the middle where Sears and Penny's are, you better watch out, because you may be going into a bunch of malls where the strongest tenant in the mall is Victoria's Secrets, and 2/3 of those malls are going to go away in the next 15 years. Somewhere in the range of 2/3 is going to go away in the next 15 years, and every analyst I know, every analyst for department stores I know agrees with that conclusion. So one of the things that we've seen happening in the United States recently is large mall owners trimming their weakest malls and selling them into new companies and holding on to their best malls. The one that I think of recently is Taubman, that sold 7 of its least productive malls to Starwood, but there have been many others. Westfield and others have been selling. And that is part of this organized shedding of this square footage in the middle. So my question for all of you is, where are the opportunities in that? What are you running from? What's going on with that? And what do you have to tell these guys who are going to come over and have to decide whether to do business with Starwood and Simon's new spinoff? Art, let's start with you. You got a few stores in those Taubman malls that got sold, and they're no longer with Taubman. What does that mean to you?
Well, for us, well, I wish I knew yesterday what I know today. It's like everything in life, right? I would say that well, you tend to get immersed in the thing with these guys. You want the good thing, you have to, they want to keep you for another year or 2 or 3 in the bad thing, and then at the end of the day, you get, you try to make the right decisions, and you can end up in a place you don't want to be for a long time. And there's, at least in our world, with what we do and the gross margins that we have and the expenses that we have, in some cases, if you're not paying any rent or any charges at all, you're still going to lose money. So
let me ask you a very specific question. You can decide whether to answer or not. You've got stores in Norfolk, Virginia. It's the lowest volume. It's recently sold or in the process of being sold. It's the lowest volume Nordstrom in the United States, $13 million. Nordstrom will absolutely close it when their operating clause comes up. What's the future of those stores?
We're out. We're out as soon as we can be.
So if you're coming from somewhere else and you're coming into the United States and you don't know what's going on inside the business, and you just walk into that mall and look, and you don't have a well-informed advisor, chances are you're going to make a mistake, because beyond that level, there's 2 or 3 layers below that where this same kind of change is going on, and it's not quite so stark as the lowest volume Nordstrom in the country. David, any thoughts on it?
Well, we have not really been a mall based retailer, like grocery stores, convenience is extremely important to us, and we don't find malls to be convenient for our customers to have to park and then walk a long way to go inside, et cetera.
You're in the commodity part,
Exactly.
convenience and price.
Exactly. So what you might hear in Europe called retail parks has been the core and substantial portion of our real estate, although we do have downtown locations, not on high streets per se, but in urban areas. But I would answer or speak to that question in this way, and that is, we seek opportunities in these types of mall situations because we know at some point, and many of this has already happened, that they are going to be demalled. Demalled meaning that the mall will basically be turned into a open-air center. And then we have an opportunity to look at the site for us because oftentimes, although the mall itself, the physical plant, is outdated, the real estate, in terms of its location, is excellent. It just needs to have the right concept on that real estate. So while we won't go into malls, we will go into a mall that is on great real estate that is turned into an open-air center. And right now, I'm negotiating multiple leases with landlords, so we're doing just that, turning a mall with Sears, et cetera, into a large strip center with the Walmart and a Home Depot, a Lowe's Improvement Center, and a Michael's, and other big box retailers that we like to be around. Never would go into that same real estate, despite it being the best real estate in these towns, if it was a mall there and not a strip.
And by the way, if you see Home Depot, Staples, Dick's Sporting Goods, any of those massive box retailers I showed you starting to take pieces of malls, we call that cannibalization. And that mall is on its way to becoming an irrelevant specialty mall, real estate project, and on its way to becoming a commodity. And it may not be a very good commodity center because oftentimes I end up what I call cannibalized. The outside is alive with body parts, but the middle, when you go in it, is empty. So if you're coming into the United States and you see that, that's likely one of those 600 malls that's in the process of closing. And it's not, a very clean process. It usually happens by starting to eat parts of the outside while the inside decays. How about from a buying perspective? You've actually analyzed some of these potential acquisitions, I think.
And we've bought malls as well. So if you categorize malls as A, B, C, the A malls never trade. They're closely held by REITs or family ownership. And so you never see an A mall trade. You never have an opportunity to purchase one. So the play of late has been in the B and C mall categories. And we've bought a few and been successful in redeveloping a couple and unsuccessful in other cases. When we've turned centers inside out, one in Northern California, we put a Staples in and it was very successful, part of the redevelopment program. My experience, though, has been with these B and C malls. They're in markets that the customer is very brand sensitive, very brand aware, and is interested. The concepts that have succeeded are brands they're familiar with. So in the context of this session, an unfamiliar brand going into that kind of property, I think, is a tremendous risk, because these markets don't appreciate, in my view, just in my opinion, unknown brands. It'd be very hard to establish one.
Were you involved in underwriting any of the large packages that have been sold over the last few years?
Yes.
And in general, what were you looking at as indicia whether they were good things to buy or not when you looked at them? And what were you most concerned about when you saw them on the market?
Well, it came down to pricing. I mean, could you get an attractive price given the risk? And with many of the malls that are coming out have too much GLA because they had been expanded recently to boost FF&O. And so you're looking at, can you take wings of it and box wings? We'd evaluate that. We'd look at rollover rents and try to be very conservative about what rents you could achieve.
And look
so
for
it's a case-by-case
look for
case.
Art Trop, who might say, I'm out of there.
You talk to Art, are you going to stay or go or whatever? Yeah, exactly. And Art then wouldn't tell you because he's a cagey, clever guy. So, but it comes down to price. I can't generalize. Some properties are well located. One thing about a mall, and we shouldn't talk all about malls because there is another 20%.
We're going to talk about that other 80%.
There's another 20%. But generally, there are lots of real estate, well located, highly visible, good traffic abilities to get to. So there are attributes to these properties.
But were you looking at them
But
mostly to convert them to other uses or to see how long you could operate them as malls?
our experience has been in urban infill locations, the ability to repurpose space is much greater in an infill location because brands like these guys will adapt their prototypes to fit into your center. If you're not in an infill location, they want to stick to their prototype, which generally doesn't fit the scenario with the mall.
Okay, now on to the commodity part of the business. So David, you're in the process of downsizing a large portion of your fleet. And that's happening in the context of consolidation going on in the ownership in that sector of our business also. What might have been 300 owners not that long ago might be down to 30, 40 owners of the core of that portfolio. Tell us about that and what are you experiencing, where are the pitfalls and where's the successes?
Well, I think for retailers coming to the United States, they should know that the vacancy rates in the United States have gone down over the last 4 or 5 years since the recession. And the larger institutions with whom we're dealing, the Kimcos and the Brixmores and the Acadias, et cetera, who are very strong, are even stronger now because of the lack of space that they have available in their portfolio, and therefore supply and demand, they can ask for higher rents. What's happened to us is that it's created a bit of an opportunity in that the downsized portion of our space, the spaces that we give back, is now important to these landlords because oftentimes it's a part of a small portion of what they have available. They're not developing many new centers, so they need retailers that are in their existing centers to give up space. And oftentimes our real estate is very, very good, so the landlords are fairly keen to take back space from us. But because of the consolidation, as you just indicated, and the lower vacancy rates, it's becoming, and the better economy, we're finding it that a little more difficult to get the deal, if you will, that we like on the downsizings that we've been used to. I don't know if there's anything else you want.
No,
to say about
that's
that.
very
Okay.
helpful. You'll find in the United States also that both on the high-end mall part of the business and in the commodity portion of the business, the landlords have been very adept in recent years at financially engineering their portfolios in ways that have created imbalances of supply and demand. So if you're looking to come in and go into an A mall in the United States, you're not going to find much availability. You're going to find escalating prices per square foot, and you're going to have to get in line for good space or make a deal like Primark did, and there's a lot of pitfalls to those kind of deals. We'll talk about those in a minute. If you're coming in and you're going into the strip center part of the business, 80% of the business, almost no growth. The large REITs are consolidating their better products, and there's not a whole lot of availability, believe it or not. Even though they're very flat markets, they're not high growth markets, as David said, there's not any new product being built either. So you're going to find that the landlords have done a very good job of financial engineering the better product in both commodity and specialty to be expensive and rare. Okay, a little switch of direction. New York City. European retailers oftentimes, or retailers from around the world oftentimes, have to make a decision between how to come into the United States. Come into New York and have a big splash and rents that can be as high as $3,000 a foot, or come in another way. Any advice to these guys, including you, Eric, on the ownership side, on what's the right strategy, what they're going to find if they go into New York and go later elsewhere, versus the other way around? And you both operate in New York as retailers, despite the fact that you're on different ends. So let's start with you, Art.
For us and for the category that we're in, the hard goods, it is a difficult market for us. I mean, I think if I was coming from somewhere else in the world and wanted to have a good start at a brand, it would be a great thing to be able to afford to be in New York. You just have to have an expectation of what you really believe your volume can be. Do your research so that you have all the best information you can. Make a good assessment of that, and you can't really expect to make a lot of money in some of the premium locations where you'd like to be. So you can find something potentially off pitch, and if you've got the right help in the market, you might be able to find some of those little gems where you can make money and still have a decent presence, but generally speaking, in that market, it's really hard for us. Again, maybe apparel is different. Hard goods tough.
We operate 20-plus stores in the Manhattan area, which is the New York City. There are 4 other boroughs which make up New York. But where most retailers seem to like to go is Manhattan, maybe Brooklyn now to a certain extent. I would say 2 things about New York. One is that you must be extremely careful with regard to your construction cost estimates. The buildings there are older. Some of them are on the historical register, so there is a longer period of time to obtain approvals. The city itself, in terms of the permitting process, is slower because they're overwhelmed. And there's just a lot of hidden costs. So as conservative as you would expect your numbers to be, double them. And then secondly, related to that is
He
time.
slurred that, but that was double.
Yeah, right. Sorry, was that?
I said you slurred that, but that was double.
I apologize.
No, I was
sorry.
just
No,
being funny.
Oh, okay, sorry. And then second, with regard to timing, as you project your store opening, it will take probably longer than you expect to get open. So get started early, start working on your leases quickly, get in for permitting, and expect there to be a long time to get your permits and then, of course, your COs before you open.
And Eric, you just bought, I think, an 80,000-foot condominiumized retail platform in Brooklyn.
That's right.
What's your experience there with leasing that to tenants that are coming in perhaps from out of the country versus elsewhere? And also, even if they're not coming in from elsewhere, what would you expect out of a tenant there that you might not be expecting elsewhere in the country?
So Williamsburg is getting a lot of notoriety domestically and internationally, and so it is a merging district. We're excited to be there, and it's, I think, well, my advice and counsel to a European retailer is get a good tenant rep broker.
You just led into my next question.
I think that's critical. It helps you, the tenant rep broker can tell you, a good one can advise you where you need to be. And we have lots of market research in our country. So there's plenty of demographic and psychographic information. But I think for a retailer, one of the best things is knowing who your customer is and finding an analog, another retailer, a co-tenant, and find out where those tenants are. The tenant rep broker will help you do that. And co-locate with a tenant, a retailer that serves your same customer. So that there's probably some very good tenant rep brokers here. I can't see with the lights. And then the next thing they should do is call Madison Marquette, because we have a vacancy for you. I can assure you of that in one of our projects. We have seen in Williamsburg, or also in Los Angeles, on La Brea Avenue, foreign retailer interest in exciting new ideas, which we, again, are starved for new entrants and new concepts in the marketplace.
So I have about 20 more questions that I'm prepared to ask, but we're down to 10 minutes, and I want to make sure we have time for questions. But I do want to ask that question of each of you. How much do you rely on outside experts to assist you in your programs, whether they be tenant brokers, research professionals, or whatever, in executing your programs in the United States? And what do you recommend, you started to touch on this, to our friends from the other side of the pond?
I would agree with everything you said. I mean, I think you need to have the right person that kind of, that you feel comfortable with and working with. And it makes a huge difference, especially in a place like that. I know that I need to do that in the U.S., and I do that internationally when I do my work there. So we do it everywhere. So.
Yeah, same here. Although we're based in the United States and we have so much experience throughout the country, operating stores for 15, 20, 25, 30 years, we have outside broker representation in every single market in which we operate, including 5 miles from our home office. So we find that type of local representation to be extraordinarily important.
And Eric, you obviously use selectively brokers in leasing, or no?
We primarily lease our own portfolio, but increasingly we're dealing with tenants. And in the case of a concept we're not familiar with, an international concept, for us, credibility is critical. We don't understand the concept, so the quality of the team the retailer has, the quality of the tenant rep broker, the credibility of that broker, the quality of the architecture, of the architect they're working with, their rollout strategy. Does their strategy make sense? Do they have a strategy? All of this feeds into, I mean, we can go to their website, but it doesn't really help that much for us. And understanding whether they're going to make it, whether it's worth banking on the tenant, we really look to the team that the tenant has assembled to lend credibility to make the risk, either capital or leasing risk, with the new concept.
So I want to make two quick additional points, and we're going to open it up for questions. The first is there's been a lot of discussion about the Primark deal, and Primark coming in the United States by leasing all or a portion of Sears. I see my friends from Cadillac Fairview over here. They bought, I think, 5 Sears in Canada to bring Nordstrom into Canada, and are in the process of doing that right now. Obviously, the opportunity of a Primark to come in and penetrate the way they did is a great opportunity for them, but I want to make sure everybody understands that that is not something, if you're coming from Europe, that you're going to have the opportunity to do very often because of 2 reasons. One, that portfolio that they picked and choose from was A malls that Sears had not yet sold to others and that they own. You won't find that Penny's owns most of their real estate, and you won't find the same kind of ownership structure within Macy's. So if you come in and you think you're going to take a piece of a failing department store, 2/3 of them are going to be in failing malls. 1/3 of them are going to be in good malls, and of those that are in good malls, if they don't own the fee, you're going to be at risk when you go in there because you're not going to be able to protect your tenancy if there's a bankruptcy or some other action along the way. So that was one point I wanted to make. The second point is, in our industry in the United States, about 2 out of 100 people understand the difference between commodity and specialty retail. So you're going to get a lot of confusing information. So you are a big leg up on most people in the United States. That information comes from the retail chapter of the Urban Land Institute's primary book called Professional Real Estate Development, and I wrote the chapter of it in 2012, so I can tell you it's good. but that is generally known, and at most events that I go to in the United States where some of the most senior people in the industry are talking, they are confusing how to execute in specialty centers with how to execute in commodity centers, and they're making a mess of things. So if you're coming in from outside, you really got to pay attention to what they're doing. And if you start to see gargoyles on Walmart centers, watch out because the costs are going to go up. The customer's not going to be terribly happy. Or in the case of where I live, in Annapolis, Maryland, with a Target on the 2nd floor, there's 7 more turning movements than my wife wants to make, and she won't shop the Target. And even though there's no Target or Walmart within 10 miles, it does 1/3 of the volume that was projected. So you really got to know what you're doing coming to the United States. So with that said, let's open up the floor to questions. Yes, sir. Let's ask the retailers, then I'll give my opinion on it.
We get our data from our internet business, our catalog and internet business. We've been doing the catalog business for 50 years plus, and half of our business today is on the internet and catalog. So we can identify exactly where our customers are coming from, and that's how we do our location decision making.
We have an internal model that we created for that purpose, and picking up on the point that Eric made earlier about finding an analog, the most important factor by far in terms of our decision to locate a store, reposition a store, close a store, etc., is the sales volume of the 1 or 2 retailers that we have a lot of experience with and know that they bring in the same customer. That probably is 60 to 70% of the weighted factor of our decision. So, for example, if let's say we are with Walmart, just using them as an example, and we find that our stores do a certain volume or trend with them, if we know what they're doing, either a new center we're looking at or an existing center, that helps a lot in terms of us making our decision. And once again, going back to what I said earlier, the relationships with retailers that are doing business in the United States, whether they're from Europe and you can network with them, or if they have similar product and similar customer and they're U.S. based but maybe not over here, I can't emphasize that enough because that's where you get the information from about demographics, about sales volume, about the credibility of a shopping center actually being built and being financed. A lot of centers are proposed, but not all of them get built or built in the same way that they're proposed. So the relationship with the retailers that are in the United States that are similar to your business is very, very key.
And I'll add two comments to that. One on the landlord or ownership side. On the ownership side, about 95% of the research that's being done in the United States to support the construction of a new specialty center is wrong today. And the reason it's wrong is because it was developed back in the 1970s and it's department store based. The basket of goods that they are estimating potential volume on or creating the gap based on is a basket of goods, 80% of which is sold in commodity retail centers now. So you get false reads both on the amount of specialty retail and on the amount of commodity retail, and that's why 75% of our specialty centers have failed. And our industry's got to figure out that the whole world has changed. On the tenant side, just to get the second part, on the tenant side, there's an enormous number of resources available, and what I was using back in the days of being the head of real estate of Zany Brainy, when there was 20 variables, today there can be as many as 500 variables that the research companies use. But one thing they don't do is they don't differentiate specialty from commodity real estate. And we did the research for Joseph A. Bank when they had done all of that, and there were 100 stores and their stock was at $2 a share. And when we did that commodity specialty differentiation, we found out there were stores that were in, with all other demographics and all the real estate qualities equal, their stores and specialty centers did 60% more volume. From that, they built a plan, and they sold that company for $2.2 billion last year. Next.
Yes, I come from Mexico, and I'd like to ask Mr. Trump, why did you decide to get in my country?
Why or when? No, we've got we believe a good partner there in Liverpool. So we think it's they're very aware of our brands, and they'll accept the brands, and so we're really looking forward to it. I'm going to be spending a lot of time down there approving real estate in the near future.
Hi, a couple of questions. First of all, I've never heard of the term commodity real estate or shopping center. It's not used much in the United States, and I think you really should describe it. What is happening is much more the urban real estate, and for companies coming in from overseas, they can more likely relate to urban main streets rather than the shopping center field.
Well, it depends on...
Well, no, I was asking the panelists,
Yeah.
actually. So do you see if a company coming in to the United States, do you see them starting off on a main street or in a shopping center?
For commodity retailers?
Retailers in general, I think he's asking, right?
Oh, I see.
Coming from other countries.
Yeah. Well, I guess I would answer it by saying that I think it really depends upon who your customer is and the product. For us, we're a commodity retailer par excellence, I would think that, other than a few exceptions, the suburban retail projects or the big box projects, if they're in urban areas, and of course Washington, D.C. and New York and others have those, would be the best venue because customers are looking to buy their products in that particular situation. We're not going to place ourselves among Nordstrom and Escada and Ferragamo, et cetera. It's not our customer. And if they are our customer, they're not looking for office products when they're shopping for those other things.
But if you're in apparel, depending on what kind of use you have, then you're more than likely going to want to try to be in one of our better malls, top 20% of the malls. And as Nick said, there's not a lot of vacancy there, and that's where you'll find the rents the toughest. But there are some wonderful streets in some of the major cities where I've seen other retailers kind of make their big start. And that might be an alternative strategy or maybe even a better one to start. Just depends on who you are. Like Lululemon started kind of being in the background, picking their spots, and ultimately they're in the malls. But
they're in plenty of Whole Food centers too.
Yeah. They've got the ability to do both.
Well, certainly experience has shown that international brands typically go to a street format that they can build their brand, and we're seeing this over and over again. They can build their brand on the street better then going into a shopping center. And typically they enter the New York market first, LA second.
Uniqlo, though, went San Francisco.
Classically, they went into street locations, and then they rolled out a shopping center strategy after that. H&M did the same thing. Now we're seeing with internet retailers the same idea, too. The Bonobos, the Warby Parkers going into street locations, and be interesting to see if the next incarnation, if they continue to go brick and mortar, whether they'll go into the better shopping centers.
I think we're close to out of time, but go ahead, one more.
Yeah, the question was for David. I was going to open in New York next year, and I've just decided not to after MAPIC. And I'm going to have to justify the decision.
Wasn't anything I
I'm
said,
going to have
was
to
it?
justify this decision when I get back to Paris. Do you mind going through other hidden costs that I can use to?
Sure. I'll try and make.
We're in Toronto, and Toronto outsold us 4-1 in the first month.
How much square feet do you need?
I need. Yeah.
It's going to become an outright cross-border battle here now.
I need 80 square meters. I don't know what that is in feet.
What is that in square
It's
feet?
800 square feet.
Don't look to me. 80 square
It's
meters. Who knows?
800 square feet. Yeah.
8,000?
800.
Oh, 800. I'm
800.
sorry.
Square feet, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And New York
Thank
was
you,
going to
Nina.
be my
8,000
birthday
square feet?
gift, but now I want something that
I
would
got a lease
actually be
plan somewhere
profitable.
here.
Well,
Yeah.
in the United States, we have what's known as the ADA, which is handicap legislation to create or force landlords or property owners to create physical structures that take into account the physical handicaps of people. So you have to have ramps, you have to have vertical transportation, i.e. elevators and escalators, things like that. Now, an 800 square foot store may not have these kind of complications, but those ADA requirements are very important, and they add time and they add money to the build out. New York is somewhat unique, although I imagine in other places the same applies. Once again, the historic landmark legislation is very important. You have to find out if your building is on that, and then you'll have an extra layer or two of approvals. You have subways, so underground construction, to the extent that you're multi-level or would take a basement space, is very complicated.
Sorry to interrupt, but do your remarks apply mostly to like flagship stores a la Uniqlo, which would be enormous? Because if you're a small 800 square foot, I wouldn't be touched by this kind of consideration. No.
Possibly not, but you also have to worry about fire exits and access. You have to worry also, not worry, but I mean you also have to be concerned about ceiling heights, and of course the electrical. So HVAC. So I mean there's a lot of these kind of elements that still apply even to a smaller store.
Okay, we're out of time, but I want Art to just give a 2-second comment, because I always tell people who are thinking about coming to the United States through New York, consider New York another country, because nothing else in the United States will be like New York. So if you go there, that's fine. Just consider yourself having gone to some other European country, because everything else in the United States is going to be different. But there is one exception in San Francisco. Could you just tell really quickly about the rules in San Francisco about neighborhood areas like great streets like Union Street and Chestnut Street off of Union Square, and then we'll finish there.
Yeah, we have some interesting legislation, local legislation that has come about. And for a while, if you had more than, I guess, 10 stores in the U.S., then you couldn't go into these neighborhoods. They wanted to keep it more local.
And do they kick you out if you have more than that?
No, you can't go in. Oh, no.
can't
You mean
get-
afterwards?
you can't-
No.
No, your grandfather.
Yeah, no.
But if you're coming in and you just happen to go down Union Street and say it doesn't look nice, or Chestnut Street, and you have more than, but they just changed it, right?
Now it's international if you've got more than 10 stores anywhere.
It's an anti-chain store ordinance, but it doesn't apply to all of San Francisco, just
Right.
neighborhood.
Right, but if you're coming
Neighborhood
in,
districts.
to Julian's
That
point,
would
if you're coming
preserve-
in and you're looking at high streets and you go to San Francisco, you're going to go to Union Square, then you're going to go to 3 other streets right away, and those 3 streets are going to be covered by that, and they're going to have to vote whether they like you or not. And with, literally. Well, it more or less comes down. We can talk about, you guys can carry it on afterwards, but thank you, everybody. I think we're out of time, and I hope you learned a little something today.
Thank you.
And thank you, panelists.